But I think this thing about pluralism is very interesting, and I would sort of wonder whether, on the one hand, you kind of embody that pluralism yourself because you are open-minded and tolerant, and I would wonder if that's the sort of thing that requires one person to hold that together, and whether or not any other most communities could pull that off without you there to give respect to both. It's something that maybe is slightly dependent on you.
I mean, it's hard for me to answer that question, but I think there's developed in this community quite a culture of mutual respect. Also, I mean, one of the things we've been thinking about a lot in our 40th year is being a community of communities. A big community needs to enable people to feel that they belong, and that's not facilitated by a vast single mass of people. And I take pride and appreciate the fact that on a Shabbat morning, when there's 3 services going on, there'll be 30, 40, 50 people who've prepared for that, and different groups going on, also groups around children and young people, and let them thrive. The aim is to foster engagement with Judaism, with Torah, with its values, with God, with prayer. I don't see why that means that everybody in the building should do the same thing in the same way at the same time.
Thank you. We're going to go to wider issues, but outside just New Northampton in a minute. But one thing I've often wondered about, having sort of watched you close up a bit, is, anybody who's had a look in Jonathan's handwritten diary, I don't know if you've ever seen that. It is like some sort of Egyptian hieroglyphic text with words crammed into each day of meeting. I mean, dozens in a day. And the kind of toll that would take on anybody, I think it's a kind of 100-hour week you work, where you're meeting somebody at 7 in the morning, but also 10 at night. But particularly, the thing that is required of a rabbi, the notion of being there for the important life cycle events. And you imagined, just a moment ago, the idea of a family that suffered a tragedy. And I'm just wondering what it does to the person who's on the receiving end of all of that, which is you. So put it this way, for most of the people in this room, there will be one of those big and terrible events every, several years, and they'll go through all that. You're having to go through that, admittedly, one removed, but with them all the time. In other words, no one's been to as many shivers as you have. No one's been to as many funerals as you have. What does that do to you, to be absorbing all of that heartache and pain of other people and being a sort of receptacle for them? I mean, people counsel often the bereaved, but who's helping you?
Just apropos that, my grandfather, from the beginning of his career, kept a book with all the weddings, all the bar mitzvahs, all the baby namings, and all the funerals he officiated at, and I never did that, and I really regret it, and I don't think I can backdate it. And when they fled Germany, for many people it was the only record of their family, particularly weddings, and we were often phoned and asked for it. I so wish I'd done that. But that leads me to the fact that, thank goodness, in this community there's lots of different kinds of life events. There's babies and there's weddings, and it's not one run of sorrow. But I would say that somebody else asked me that question actually just this week. I like people. I genuinely and really like people. I don't find it difficult to be with people in situations which are painful or stressful for reasons I really don't understand. I also haven't been afraid of the presence of death. And there is something about closeness to people in moments which matter, which is also very giving, and in which one's humanity is being exposed and in some ways spoken to. And I care about those moments, and I don't find them impossible. And unless they come one after another, sort of in a complete sequence without any time to walk the dog, I find them bearable and doable, and I find them much easier than but sometimes petty politics and anger. That's actually, and I think any rabbi will say, or minister will say, that's much more stressful. That's really much harder. And I do take counsel when things are difficult. And I do appreciate my own family, and I think for Nikki and I, the garden, and also, you're right about its long week, it's not always as long as 100 hours, but for me, to know that Nikki and I will have some time in the next, in an 8-week horizon, a couple of days out of London, that's just lifesaver. Because when I'm home, I actually can't switch off. But out of town, I can, and also the world of trees and animals, birds and plants, I find very restorative and very nourishing. And I also have to say, when people talk about their real spirit and what they care about in life, it's hugely affirmative, and I'm far less cynical now than perhaps I was when I was younger, because it opens the heart.
I can't really imagine you being cynical, actually. I'm trying to picture the cynical Jonathan. It's not really... You mentioned the walking and the garden. You haven't yet mentioned your affection for animals. I have to say these three things put together have sometimes made me wonder whether you're Jewish, let alone a rabbi. And also the other thing, which is deeply un-rabbinic, I think, is you're an extremely spiritual person. I mean, you know, I mean, no disrespect, but you know, you can sit with rabbis' brows who will talk to you about politics, they'll talk to you about Israel, they'll talk to me about media bias. God rarely gets a mention, but with you, you are a very spiritual person, and that must be part of, we should get onto this a bit, why you've been able to connect with people of other faiths, because you actually are, you're quite religious, and there's plenty of rabbis who are not.
It's a strange charge to be held towards it was Rabbi Dr. Albert Friedlander who interviewed me for Leobeck College, and he used to say that he considers it name-dropping if anybody should mention God. I gather some people don't. One of the things I really asked myself a lot and worried over during the period of time when I was studying for the rabbinate, and in my early years as well, and occasionally now, but less so, perhaps wrongly less so, was what I meant by believing in God and whether I believed in God enough. And I've always had a critical belief. But it may be that it's been fostered by contact with people in nature, and also a love of particularly Midrashic and Hasidic writing. But yeah, I do care about the spiritual. I can't help myself. I was with a group earlier today who were talking about the importance of atheists having a place in the Jewish community, and I found myself saying that, you know, if I look at the world's politics, probably the atheists are less of a threat right now than the religious, but I'm sorry I belong to the latter. And actually it's important that there are voices, non-fundamentalist voices within that group. That's what Rabbi Dr. Jacobs was and what his teaching is. But the sense of a oneness within all things, the sense of all life being part of a greater whole, and the sense of respect and veneration and responsibility that entails, seems to me a profound root of all commandments. And I often think of the verse from Isaiah, "They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain," as the root of everything. Now that's something I care about and I feel, and in the end, it's important to serve something like that and to try not to be a destroyer but an enhancer and a respecter of life and the source of life.
You brought us to this point which I wanted to get to about where we are now, and particularly the worries people in this room and in this community and beyond will be having at the moment. And you've mentioned the word fundamentalism. You've been unusual in the amount of interfaith dialogue you've done, particularly with local and national Muslim community. You have taken some knocks for that. Jewish Chronicle, others have criticised you for some of the conversations you've had with Muslim counterparts. where are we on that? I mean, people are really anxious. I think that's fair to say that. You've got a different perspective because of some of those conversations. You know, where's your anxiety level at? What's your thought about the recent events, particularly the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, that's difficult and it's complicated, and I don't have great reassurance. I don't have good to say about the phenomenon of militant Islamism. How could one? It's real, and however much one says and repeats, and it's true that this is a marginal phenomenon. It still is. It's a margin in many places, and it's a vast world, and it has produced terror in many parts of the globe. And I think there's no reason to believe that we should be safer here from such threats than in France or elsewhere in Europe. And all those who've been involved in intelligence services have said that however good one's intelligence, one can't prevent everything all the time anywhere. And I think we're living with that as our reality. And what I think we have to do is commit ourselves to our values, live our way of life, and engage more deeply, if anything, with community, because it's better in these times to be part of community than to be alone. And that we live our Judaism. I've also tried to ask myself, and I've had moments of disappointment in relationship to some of my interfaith colleagues. Could you speak up? You know, I thought you might have contacted me. I've had to ask myself, did I contact them at key moments? And sometimes I did, but sometimes I didn't. But I think that for a Muslim leader, it's very difficult, because more than for Jews, but we hate it when Jews are in the front line for having done bad things. It's virtually a daily experience, and you put your head out there and you see your faith effectively blamed in the public eye. You want to speak out against it, but you wrote about it. Is it the duty of every Muslim, every time something happens, to say, in case you thought I was an Islamist, here I am and I'm not? So I think that's also difficult. Now, that means that while taking every precaution and being clear in the profound disagreement with the abuse of religion and God, there isn't compromise in such a position. We also reach out and make ourselves available to engage with and support communities of other faiths in their struggles to live their true religious values. And that work becomes just more urgent. I was very struck. I received a letter, and we actually put it on the Synagogue's website, from Tom Cohen, who has a Kehilat Kesher in Paris. And he had two appeals. One was for communities in France. They've got a lot of security work to do on their buildings. But the other was to increase our interfaith work. And when I was in Beersheba in the summer, it was a kind of a lull in the war, which thank God led to the ceasefire. The Masoti Rabbi of Beersheba said his plan is to increase his interfaith work with his neighbours, because he doesn't want members of his community to grow up having only feelings of fear and hate of the other. So we have to be doing both things in conditions which aren't propitious and which will sometimes be misunderstood.
And what do you make of the recent conversations that people have been having in print, and also maybe around the Shabbat dinner table, about even the viability of a diaspora community like this one? People asking, it's 30, 40 years of New North London. Do you, after a week like the one we've all gone through, fortnight, think to yourself, this will be here in 40 years, or do you find yourself doubting that?
It's interesting. I was at the Second Generation Conference earlier today, and the keynote address was given by Rabbi Dame Julia Neuberger. And she said, look, what part of my legacy, she said, I'm grateful to Britain, I love living in Britain. She lives between London and also Southern Ireland. But part of the legacy is I never feel 100% secure. It's just how it is. Now, I don't really believe the report that 45% of British people are seriously anti-Semitic. And I don't believe that most Anglo-Jews are thinking of leaving and feeling moment by moment unsafe in the streets. I also listened to a report from Jerusalem during the funerals there earlier this week, in which I was being told by an Israeli reporter that one can't walk around London with the kippah on one's head. Well, I've done so for the last 30 years, and I've had about 3 incidents. So I think those things are not true. But I think it's dangerous to be Jewish now pretty much everywhere. It's challenging and dangerous in Israel. It's challenging and dangerous in Europe, Eastern and Western, of different levels. And America may be the safest at the moment, but I wouldn't bet on it. I would hope that this community would thrive. As an ideal, I believe in pluralism as the best ideal that we have. I'm nervous about kind of the ideal of the mono-ethnic, mono-religious culture and country. I mean, Israel is also in its way a pluralist country, it should be. Because of what that does to the range of one's ideas and the capacity to live together. So I want it to thrive, but do I believe the guarantees? No, I certainly don't. And I don't think any of us does. I think the times are genuinely frightening, and I think we do what we can for practical security. Grateful to the CST, grateful to the police, to the work with the government, which has been supportive of those endeavours and is broadly benign towards us. But I think also we have to deepen our allegiance to our Judaism, both in terms of practice and knowledge, and to the deepest human values that it teaches us.
I'm conscious that people are going to want to get in with questions of their own, so this will be the last one from me, even though we haven't got on to Israel. I'm sure it's going to come up. But we've talked a lot about the difficult things. Let's just, before we get open out, put ourselves in a slightly cheerier frame of mind. As you survey this community here, but also the wider Anglo-Jewish community, what things have obviously and sort of palpably got better over the last 30 years?
Well, this community, I'm really grateful. It's just hugely vital. I feel I'm part of a fantastic team on the professional level. There's Rivka, and there's Claire, and there's Barbara, and there's Nikki Jackson who's joined the team, and there's Noah, my youth movement. And the lay leadership is really strong, and also the structures around them are excellent. And one of the best symptoms of health is the length of the buggy queue outside. It's easy to get irritated with children, when there's a racket, but thank God for them. Many communities would give half their existence to have a third of that number of children. It's fantastic. And there's huge dynamism, and there are a lot of people committed to Jewish learning, and there are people more observant than I am in the community. And I have many colleagues in the community, so if I was to disappear tomorrow, this community would, which I don't plan or hope to do, this community would thrive. I want to see it. I want to see it go many directions. I want to see it deepen its commitment to learning. I want to see it deepen its commitment to practice and prayer. I also want to see it see us engage more widely with fellow communities locally and nationally of different faiths, and ecologically. I envisage our own organic eggs produced on site. If I had my way, that would be goat's milk and goat's cheese as well, but that's one ambition at a time. In Anglo Jewry, I think the greatest transformative phenomenon is actually Limud. Limud has been hugely beneficial to our community. It's made learning cool, but it's also been a place of engagement for lots and lots of people in their Judaism, and engagement with one another for a significant number of people who've met at Limud as well. Something I'd like to see in this community that hasn't happened and disappoints me, you said a positive note, this is, during the time of Gaza, and perhaps again now I try it, I actually wrote to some of the lay leaders and said, isn't this time to bring all the rabbis and the senior lay leaders together and say, we are in difficult times. We are effectively on the same team here. How do we deploy? We'll put aside some of our religious differences and some of the fact that some of us are more on the left and the right. If you've got good interfaith contacts, will you do that for us? If you've got these contacts and strengths, will you do that for us? There is no such thing as leadership team across the board in Anglo Jewry. In the deepest sense, there are parts of it. Now, that's a weakness which could be remedied with some vision and forbearance.
Thank you. I've got lots more on my list, but let's open it out for questions.